From recycling clothes off dead soldiers to the ominous presence of gas masks, the First World War, or the Great War as it's called, quickly became an era when otherwise peculiar behaviors were overlooked due to unprecedented horrors at the time. As the saying goes, desperate times will result in desperate measures. War being one of the most stressful situations can lead people to do things they would not normally imagine to do in other trying times. With thinning resources and the ever-looming fear of death, the Great War led not just people, but governments to undertake desperate decisions that will otherwise be seen as creepy, as well as normalize situations that will likely be frowned upon in today's world. The death of cowards. Imagine this, it's morning of 1914 and this is your last day on Earth. You are about to be killed. Let's say you're a young man in your 20s. Outside this barrack, a war is beginning to ravage most of Europe, your home continent. Back to this morning, the morning you die. You are taken out and tied to a pole. You watch the executioners in that split second before they pull the trigger. These men, your killers. You share the culture, you speak the same language. As a matter of fact, you are supposed comrades. This was the case in the First World War that occurred on both sides of the conflict. Contrary to the ideas of the modern world, not many freedoms were afforded to the populace on whether or not they chose to be involved in the war. Deserters and supposed cowards were met with disdain. This was, of course, before they were executed for their cowardice. One of such instances was Herbert Morrison, a 17-year-old barely of age to be in college yet gunned down for his cowardice. This disdain for cowardice was not just reserved for the victims, but also their widows and other family members. Advancement in modern science and psychology has us understanding that some supposed cowards may have been suffering from what is now called post-traumatic stress disorder, perhaps occurring from shell shock. In 2006, the British government pardoned victims of these executions. Recycling. While you might relate recycling to modern times as a trendy solution to the climate crisis, recycling as a means to counter the effects of limited resources has always been a thing, especially in the time of war when economic activity has all but ceased. However, recycling during the Great War was a lot more than an English woman saving jars to use on a later date. Sometimes it was a more systematic process, especially to preserve the uniforms of soldiers who had died, for the next batch of young men who would be thrust into this bleak reality. The uniforms were taken based on the condition of the body of the soldier who had been wearing them before being gunned down. So the uniform of a freshly dead soldier would be of more value than one in which the dead soldier had already begun decomposing. In the second case, the soldier will be buried in their uniform. Other personal items gotten from the dead soldiers were usually returned to their next of kin. However, soldiers were known to take little valued items from their fallen comrades, such as woolen socks. The British had seamstresses behind the lines to help stitch up uniforms gotten from dead soldiers, especially in areas of bullet penetration. The clothes were then dyed, perhaps to mask any bloodstains, before being handed to the next batch of soldiers. According to rumors, the Germans also recycled British uniforms to be cut and dyed to the German military pattern, as it was believed that the British uniform was of a much better quality than the ones available in Germany. You smell garlic, you die. Following the massive industrialization of the 19th century, there were calls for regulation, particularly in regards to what was acceptable in warfare. Following an initiative from the last Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II, countries signed a treaty during the Hague Conventions of 1899 and 1907. But barely 7 years later, when the First World War began, this treaty was cast aside as both parties began and eagerly participated in war crimes. The first successful use of lethal gases was chlorine at the Second Battle of Ypres, where a significant number of the French-Algerian troops met their demise. Chlorine gas, a greenish-yellow gas, is not usually found in nature due to its highest reactive state, and after its discovery, it will not be mined extensively due to its seeming lack of economic benefits. All of this was easily overcome by German scientists, and even though opponents on both sides of the war opposed the use of chlorine, deeming it a coward's tactic, it soon became a staple. Exposure to chlorine can cause burns on the skin, but in the airways, chlorine is much more devastating as it can trigger RADS, an asthma-like symptom, and ultimately asphyxiation. Due to effective measures against chlorine owing to its ability to easily dissolve in water and its distinct color, other gases were soon employed. French chemists led by Victor Grignard developed phosphine gas, which was much more effective and potent than chlorine. It was equally more difficult to detect owing to its almost odorless scent. Even though phosphine killed more people than all the other gases combined during the war, it will not receive as much acclaim as the mustard gas, which in the scientific sense was more of a liquid than a gas. Bearing a garlic-like scent, once dispersed, mustard gas could remain active for weeks or even months depending on the weather. It caused blisters to the skin of victims and could induce vomiting. It also caused both internal and external bleeding, and sometimes victims died after up to 5 weeks of excruciating pain after contact. Quickly, measures were put in place to counter the effects of these gases, one of which was the spooky, ominous gas masks that became infamous during the war. Even though gases were less effective than other artillery, they quickly became an effective tool of psychological warfare. Following the end of the war, chemical weapons quickly became unpopular, and after the Geneva Protocol of 1925, 132 nations signed a treaty banning the use of biological and chemical weapons during warfare. Of course, these weapons were still used, especially in colonial wars outside of Europe. None were used during active combat of the Second World War years later, even though the Nazi government used it during the Holocaust. Poison gases still remain controversial while being used in modern conflicts. Child soldiers. In modern times, while the idea of child soldiers is met with deserved horror, it was almost quite common during the Great War for children of less than 18 to don uniforms and engage in active combat. Boys caught up in the sweeping tide of patriotism signed up for war, hoping for adventure ahead or simply to escape poverty. Even though in Britain you had to be at least 19 to fight, recruiting agents were willfully turning blind eyes to youngsters hoping to join the military. One such case was Sidney Lewis, who joined the East Surrey Regiment at the age of 13. Due to Lewis's mature appearance, his age went undetected and he participated in 2 battles before untimely getting discharged after his mother, who was not aware of his whereabouts all the while, reported to the army. George Marr was another 13-year-old boy who had lied to join the army, but unlike Lewis, on the very first day of battle, Marr began crying during heavy shelling. His real age was discovered and he was subsequently discharged from the army. But perhaps the youngest recorded combatant was Serbian Gavrić Momčilo, who was just 8 years of age when he joined the military. Gavrić's parents and siblings had been massacred by the invading Austrian forces. Gavrić had been spared because he had been on an errand for his father. After returning to find his murdered family and his village pillaged, he headed out to seek help and then met the 6th Artillery Division of the Royal Serbian Army. Gavrić was accepted into the unit and assigned a caretaker. He was quickly able to exert revenge on the Austrian soldiers by leading the Serbian army to their location. While Gavrić survived the war and went on to lead a normal life, not many child soldiers were as lucky, as many perished during the war.